Okay, everyone, we're going to get started and welcome to the County Leadership Series. So this is designed for all county executive officers and particularly tonight for members of the Fixtures Committee. So there is obviously our Club Leadership Series for people who are members of clubs and club executives. There's our Coach Series, there's our Match Official Series, Player Series, and then the County Leadership Series is very much for county executive officers. So just be aware everything that we'll be talking about in this session will be aimed towards the county executive officer. So we'll get started. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please type it into the Q&A and we'll try and get back to it at the end. And if you can't hear at any stage, if you leave the webinar and come back in, then you should pick it back up again. So just going to get you to think for a few minutes, not even a few minutes, a few seconds there in your county over what do you think has worked well in relation to fixtures in your county. So what are some of the things that you think worked well? And there's no point in thinking we're very good when we ask what didn't work well. We can pick out loads of stuff, but there's loads of things that work really well. Look at the amount of games that's played in every single county. So what's the things that you feel worked well in your county? Okay. And for the opposite of that, thinking for a second, what have been the challenges in relation to fixtures in your county? So yes, there is challenges that come for as well. It's not an easy job. Okay, and that's one thing we'll be stressing with this webinar tonight is we're not going to come to you and say, here's the perfect fixtures structure. We can't do it because every county is different with the number of clubs there is, number of teams in those clubs. Everything is different in relation to it. So what we can do is give you some hints and tips as to how to put it all together, but it will be up to you to look at, okay, well, what's going well that we can build on and what's the challenges? Because they're the only things really you need to change the piece of the jigsaw on. You don't need to change everything. If there's stuff working really well, but what's the challenges? What's the pieces of the jigsaw that you feel you're going to need to change? So the key ingredients of a fixture plan, we'll go through these in a bit more detail. Planning, which is when you design each competition. So knowing the number of teams, the structure, the number of rounds, where the competition will be placed. So we'll show you all that in a lot more detail as we go through it. So how do you do all that to get the minimum standards for various grades? And it can help to check fair and registration to see what suits your county. So is there a huge abundance of under 14s, for example, coming up that we're going to have a lot of under 14, like we're going to have a lot of teams entered from under 14. So trying to check the fair and registration to see what potentially could be coming up. Then also when you're scheduling, putting all those fixtures, you now know what the fixtures are, you know how many teams, etc. there is, but you're placing those fixtures into a calendar and that's going to be published before the start of the playing season. So that's the scheduling piece. Arranging them then means, okay, we know the schedule, but we now have to go and arrange them. So the specific matters, it might have been over the weekend in the scheduling, but now you need to know the date, the time, the venue, the referee. So a lot of that arranging will sit with your fixtures committee and putting all that in place. But it is essential to have competition guidelines in place to ensure that fixtures are played. And we'll have a section on competition guidelines. And I stress this every year. If you have a load of fixtures problems coming to a county board meeting, you don't have competition guidelines or you don't have adequate competition guidelines because your competition guidelines should cover 99% of things that happen and they should not need to be coming near a county board meeting. They're dealt with by the fixtures committee under those competition guidelines that was agreed. Reviewing then means collecting all the stats of all the games played during the year, looking at them against the national standards, and then, okay, well, there's things we've done really well. Here's things we potentially change, and you bring that into the following year. So even at the minute, looking back at 2023's fixtures, what did they look like? What went well? What didn't? Is there certain age groups that didn't get enough games? Is there certain age groups that maybe got too many games? And actually looking at that in relation to it. So for competition types, there's not just a championship and a league. There's loads of different competition types. And I think in fairness to a lot of counties, they've really excelled in this since the split season came in, because maybe the split season doesn't mean competition finishes. It means, yeah, you may not be playing your championships then because your county players are not available. But what about the rest of the players in all the clubs? So is there other type of competitions you can have? Is there cups, for instance, that's without your county players? Is there 7, 9, 11 aside? And that doesn't mean just adult, that can be across your underage as well. Your go games have to go in there. So there is a very clear go games policy, and that cannot be broken, which we'll touch base in a few minutes as well. Is there winter, spring leagues, participation leagues? As you said, non-county player competitions, festival of games. So instead of them having to be fixed over X amount of dates, can we bring all our under 16s together for a seven-a-side festival, for example, something different, and particularly in that teenage years where they're telling us we want something different. How can you come up with a few things that's really going to spark their imagination in relation to it? So the split season structure does not mean there's no club games until the county ends. It's complete opposite. Okay, it's so important to keep all those club players active through other types of competitions that you might be providing them. And it is important that you're tracking players rather than teams, because a lot of the times you hear, oh, they're going to be burnt out from it. But actually, when you track the players, for instance, and we'll show an example coming up, if you don't track the players, some of them might not get any games till the end of the season. Yes, their team may have had a lot, but trying to track the player rather than the actual teams. Some of the issues that have been sent to us from counties, and even on some of the queries that you filled in when you were registering for the session, not enough gains being provided for players. So find it difficult maybe to fit in fixtures to give enough games to all players. Too much or too little time between fixtures. So it can be that maybe we have our first game this month and we don't have another one for another 6 weeks. Or the opposite, it comes to this time at the end of the year, and next thing it's, oh, we didn't play our minor competition, which baffles me all the time. I don't know how many places always have minor competition at the end, yet they're in age of dropout and we put it to the coldest time of the year. It should be taking place throughout the years. We'll show on it as well. But then all of a sudden there's like fixtures in 2 or 3 days, 2 or 3 days. So trying to spread them out as much as possible. Too short of time period for fixtures. So all the under 12s done in April, May, then we move to under 13s June. And that's fine, but some of those players will only play under 12. So that means they're done for the year. So how do we spread that out? We'll give a little bit of example on that as well. Fixtures not been set until short time scale before they're due to take place. So we didn't find out till tonight that we have a game on Thursday. Okay, so trying to do it. And all of these things are difficult, but that's where the more planning we can put into it, the better. And I have to say, a lot of counties have really excelled now in pulling their fixtures schedules together. Too many fixtures not taking place in their scheduled date or failing to fulfill. So that's where your competition guidelines come in, that at least if this happens, what happens? It's not that they put out and put out and put out. There's clear competition guidelines. And if there's not competition guidelines, your county board meetings will be taken over by fixtures discussions. They should not be there. If your competition guidelines are strong enough, they should not be there. They're getting those competition guidelines in place. Dual player clash. So how can we work things around that we're not all putting the fixtures down for the same day? It's not always easy. None of us have a crystal ball. So we can try and say team A and team B are most likely to be in the camogie final, for example, and you can plan all your fixtures that hopefully they're not clashing, but all of a sudden it takes one of those teams to lose and now there's a clash. So it's not completely possible, but how much is possible can we work with? Maybe X day is football, X day is camogie, and you'll see that through the sample competition guidelines as well. County managers dictating fixtures. So with the split season, it's not as big of an issue because there is a time dedicated to allow the county player be with the county team, but it doesn't mean all the other fixtures can't go ahead. Access to pitches can be difficult. There's more and more teams, more and more clubs. Getting pitches is not easy. So how do we go about it and think differently outside the box of some of the pitches we can use as well? I know a number of counties linking very heavily with third level, for instance, where pitches aren't being used the whole way through the summer. So is there other areas we can work with as well as our clubs and our county facilities? Shortage of referees. We're all looking for them, all codes at the same time. But there's no point in us knowing this could be a problem and not doing something about it now. So that's where the County Development Committee and ensuring you have somebody as the lead for match official development is in place and working with your referees. And then cooperation with clubs. If the clubs aren't cooperating with you, it's very hard to get the fixture schedule in place. So before we start, as I said, it is important that you're tracking the player and not the teams. So this is what we mean by an example of this. So if you look at under 14, for example, 8 of them also play under 16, and yet that tends to be the player that we look at. We're looking at that player going, oh geez, they're going to be burnt out. But look at there's 12 of them that play under 14 only. So if we put our under 14 fixtures all down into the space of 2 months, they have 10 months of nothing. Okay, the under 16s might have something, but the 12 don't, and then we wonder why we're losing them. Okay, so we need to look at the players rather than the actual teams. all the teams need to get enough fixtures. The coaches then will need to balance out in relation to the players themselves. Under 16s, maybe 10 of them are under 18 only. 8 of them are also in the under 14 team. Okay, so that's where it's important that we have the spread of fixtures, right? That they're not all the same night. But look, there's 6 of them under 16 only. Okay, and think about the competitions you have in your county at the minute. How many games are you given to each of these age groups? Forget about the players that's playing on them. How many games are you given to each of these age groups? Under 18, 5 might be in the adult team also. And you hear that a lot. So they're all on the adult team. They're not. Okay, or they might be named in the end of it, but they're not all getting games. So they're all trying to be involved for 12 months of the year, but for how many games? 10 of them might be under 16 as well, and 7 of them then under 18 only. And then the adults, you have 5 that maybe came up from under 18, 4 of them are with the county, and 16 are adult club only. So how do we make sure we get enough games for all of these? Remembering that not every player plays on more than one team. So that's where it's really important that there's enough games for each of these age groups, but spread out, that they're not overlapping, that could potentially lead to that burnout. So looking at that, when we look at our fixtures reviewing, we're looking at the minimum standards. This is what was set, and I know there's a bit of work being done on these currently because obviously with the split season things change slightly. But the recommended guidelines at the time that were approved were adult of a minimum of 16 games. And that's everything. That's championship, that's league, that's everything. So 16 games. Under 15 to 18 was a minimum of 12 games. Under 14 and below, a minimum of 16 games. And that's per player, okay? So that's trying to get enough games per player versus per team. The games should be scheduled with gaps of no more than 21 days between them in the months from April to October. So that's not we play it now and we don't play it for another month. Okay, they're trying to spread it out a little bit. An exception is obviously around exam time because there's different age groups it just doesn't suit for. And then games in the same grade should be scheduled at least 5 days apart. So we don't have a minor championship tonight and then in 2 nights of the next one because we're running out of time. So that they are spread out. So that's why it's really important to get your planning done at the start of the year. The target for counties should be to ensure 80% of their games are played as initially scheduled. And I know a lot of counties who are really doing this well. They literally have their list of games and all the dates, and then they put in when they were actually played. And they're going after that target. Okay, there's always going to be a few exceptions. But where they count them as being initially played, it's also that they were the date they originally were fixed for, or within the number of days that has been approved through your competition guidelines. So it's giving you that bit of leeway in relation to it. It is remembering that our sport is a pastime. So players need to be able to plan, coaches need to be able to plan. So knowing in advance when things are really helps keep people involved in the game. So asking yourself before you do put your plan in over the coming year, do we meet the minimum standards? So when we've put in all those fixtures things, are we giving enough games to the different age groups? Are we going after how they're spread out, etc.? Have we engaged with our clubs to review? So have you asked the clubs this year how things went? Okay, if you want to bring the clubs with you, it's really important to engage them. How did it go? What's things that worked really well? Where's a few tweaks we could do? What didn't work well? What's the lessons we need to bring for the coming year? So how can we improve things with those lessons? And have we looked at registration numbers for various grades to ensure appropriate gains for all? So you can see what's coming up through the various clubs. So when you have that, it allows you to get into your planning. Okay, so this is the fixture planning. So these are your steps. Firstly, assess the number of dates required to finish each competition, prioritising championship. So you might have the senior championship, number of dates is going to be needed for this. We need 5 separate dates, and this is the date we need to finish it on. Okay, don't worry about what those dates are at the minute, just how many dates are you going to need. The same then with intermediate, with junior, with minor, etc., the whole way down. Okay, how many dates are you going to need? So that gives you a good outline of how many dates you're going to want. Then look at the calendar. And remember, you can use the first half of the year for club activity, focus on non-county players. So that half the calendar's not gone. There's loads of stuff you can fill in there. Add your provincial and national fixtures. They've been approved, they've been sent out. I know the national ones were approved in October, so they're all there. So add them in so you can see where they fit into it. And then prioritise your core age grades. So if you are a county that has maybe some of the in-between ages as well, as in it can't be half ages, it must be full ages, so 15s, 17s, for example. Put in your core age groups first, so your adult and the first teams of each of these, your minors, your 16s, your 14s, and anything then that's kind of an added in, because I know some counties might play under 15s later in the year just to give some more football to those in between. So yeah, add those in then. So get your core age grades done first, and then prioritize those ones up. Insert the most important competitions working back from the final date. So you might start with your championship. Okay, what's your championship dates that you're going to want? What's the dates you're going to need things to be filled by? Then start with your league. Then you might put in cup competitions, or there's a day we want an under 7-a-side festival of football. So you get to start populating things around it, but working from your most important competitions backwards. Insert all other competitions then, making sure they're spread to allow football for players of all ages throughout the season. So not having those pockets, and you'll see that coming up in a slide, having those pockets where it's only played at that time of the year. And remember, as we said, not all under 12 girls play under 14, for example. There must be enough games for all of these age groups to allow those players who are only that age group to work on it. And liaise, of course, with other sports where possible. I know there's the dual player across Camogie Ladies football. There's multiple sports our girls are playing. They're multi-sported in many ways, but especially getting across the ladies football and Camogie, is there different dates we can pick for County A or County B to be able to pick those from it? Go Games I mentioned. So Go Games was relaunched across Gaelic games this year. So you'll see the rule that's there in our official guide, but it's the new Gaelic Games policy document that will supersede this, and this will be updated at Congress this year. But the new Gaelic Games policy document is clearly there. It shows you everything from all the different age groups, under 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, what can happen in relation to them. There's a whole section on our website. You'll see the web address there. But it's really important that this is adhered to. And we have had a number of counties that have breached this, and they have been brought to CODA. Also, if you see it happen in your clubs within your county, you must address that also. The key question I suppose we get asked on Go Games is from some clubs who may have ran a memorial tournament, for example. Maybe it's the Elizabeth Murphy tournament or whatever the name is that's on it. Why can't you play this anymore? So you can play it, but there's no Elizabeth Murphy Cup needs to be presented at the end of it. If you think of all the girls who's coming to that under 10 tournament, for example, for them, it's not who's taking the cup home. If they all get a medal with the Elizabeth Murphy tournament on it, they're all getting something to bring home. So you can still have those. They're not a tournament, it's a festival of football. So it'll turn into the Elizabeth Murphy Festival of Football. And again, some clubs have really done this well over the last year and getting so much satisfaction, enjoyment, and actually far more recognition for the person with all the kids getting something, whether it's a cert or whatever, to take home with them. But all details on Go Games is available, but it's really important that these are fully adhered to in relation to Gaelic games. Just a sample then of what we meant by kind of spreading these out. So if you look at this first one, you can see if we start going in blocks, it just doesn't work. So the under 14 is going to be played bang, 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 but then it's finished. When the under 14 is finished, and I know this is showing a very narrow sample, but just to show what we mean, under 14 is finished, then we'll start the under 16. Okay, and that's fine for the player who's in both, but the player who is just under 14 is finished. Okay, potentially finished in a month. The same with the adults, there's nothing there for minors. If you look at the minor players, have nothing the whole way through it. And again, thinking of the age groups that we say there's dropout, are we putting them in a pocket where they're asking to train for a year for this? And particularly around the under 16, the minor to adult, where it's like, it's taken that they're on the next teams. They might be listed in the panel. A lot of them don't get games. So how do we make sure they're getting loads of activity? Another sample here. So you can see in this one, there's a lot more spread out in it. Okay. And again, because we wanted just to show it narrow, you can see the under 14s might be on a certain day. The under 16s, because there's potentially overlap, might be the week after. Okay. So they might not, or will go to the Friday, the opposite ends of the week. The under 18 might be in the middle. And again, this might be a little condensed. You might have maybe under 14 this week and 16 in 2 weeks' time, the 18s the week in the middle. But there's a nice spread of what's actually going then. The same with the adult league. We purposely put it together, but you might see an actual switch just to spread out the things that people are getting plenty of games. In this case, you might say it's too condensed in that there's players playing a lot of those things, but we just threw it up there so you can see it. But in this case, you'd probably move 16s out a week, put under 18s and under 14s, and then under 16s the following week. There will be still a little slight overlap, but not as much. So if you look at that, what we mean by that, there's the under 14 league, under 16 league spread out, and then the minor leagues the following week, and adults are spread out again. Okay, so how do we get them? And that's just shown 1 month, but it is great to be able to say that all our teams are playing at a certain time instead of all the minors is in October, November. Okay, what about the rest of the months of the year for those minor players that are getting nothing? So it's just, as I said, it's not a best practice in it. It's just to make you think when you plot them out, how are you actually making sure that players are active throughout the year and not just at one period of the year? And we had this even from a county we spoke to this year where their under 12s were finished in April. That was it for the year. Okay, so they were like, oh, they're playing under 14 and playing. Not all of them. Okay, so how do we make sure we get a good spread out of these things? In order for those to work, you need competition guidelines. Okay, so we have some samples. On our website, we actually have a sample competition guidelines under county in the hub. If you download that, you can actually look at it and all the different areas that's in it. So just a sample of some of the things that's in it. It should be specific to your own county. They're in conjunction with the LGFA guide and the county bylaws. You can have general guidelines and then you can have specific for each competition. They are there to help fixtures take place as planned. That's the number one reason for them. It does prevent county board meetings being consumed by fixtures, and we've seen evidence of that. I was working with counties where it was literally all fixtures. It wasn't a county board meeting. By putting these in, cleaned county board meetings became a county board business. And think what guidelines are required to ensure your fixtures go ahead as planned. So if you think of the challenges from earlier, is there a guideline you could have put in place that would have stopped that challenge or helped that challenge? So that's what you're trying to do. So some of the areas, and again, these are just samples. Some of the areas might be the fixtures themselves, the referees, the results, the placings, match day and regulations. So what do we mean by these? So for fixtures, and these are not all the headings, they are in your sample ones, changing a date of a fixture. So it'll be clear guideline. If a club wants to change the date of a fixture, this is how it's done. Okay, and that will have guidelines, for instance, about who they need to contact, when it needs to be done by. Also, it could be that if they want to change it, it can only be 5 days prior to the fixture, it can't be afterward. So very detailed in relation to, and the clubs know that at the start of the year, but that's it. They're in it. If they fall outside of that, unfortunately, the club falls outside of that. It's difficult for the first year, but when you get it working, it really works. If a club fails to fulfill a fixture, so instead of it having to come to the county board meeting and we're voting for X, Y, and Z, and one club gets favour over another club, it's clearly in the guidelines. If they fail to fulfill a fixture, this is what happened. Okay, done. It's dealt with the fixtures committee because the competition guidelines were there. Failing to fulfill multiple fixtures, what happens? Okay, so again, there's sample guidelines in all these. Postponing matches, and there's even guidelines around postponing matches around a death. It does happen in a club, but it clearly outlines who that death would be. Okay, and I know that might seem a bit morbid, but it's not. It was the great granduncle of whoever. So it clearly states who those people are, and the link to the club. Player eligibility, so who's eligible to play in what competitions. And then county teams, a section around, and as I said, that has got a little bit easier in relation to the split season, and this is when they are. And then any exceptional circumstances. So a lot of the times you'll hear it's called off because of exception, but what is exceptional circumstances? Okay, so actually listing what the things are. So as I said, they're all in the sample ones you can get in the website, including pitch availability and clubs with 2 teams, A and B. You may not need them all for your county, but certainly look at it and see, is there things on this that would really help? How do we determine places in a league table? That we don't come to the last round of the league and we know that potentially 2 clubs could be on the same points. How are we going to decide it? Well, do you know what? We'll have a meeting and see how that's going to be decided. That needs to be at the start of the year and ratified. Clubs then can't come given out. If they didn't read it, that's on themselves. But they can't be given out. How can you determine it by X, Y, or Z? Because it was clearly in the competition guidelines. So changing the date of a fixture, these are just samples of those things that we mentioned. So, for example, permitted, both clubs must agree on an alternative date before seeking permission to change the game to the fixture coordinator. No games can be moved or changed without permission. Failure to do this will result in the loss of points. The onus is on both teams to inform the referee, etc., etc. So now you can see that doesn't need to go to a county board meeting because the clubs clearly knew what would happen if they needed to change the date of a fixture. The same for postponing matches, and there you can see an example. So these are all samples, but it clearly states a bereavement of a close family member of a player, mentor, or club official, serious tragedy in the parish, and provided the fixtures committee and opposing team have been informed, and it states who the close family member is. Okay, so that's just so that it's very clear for clubs if they go looking for it. Well, there's no point in us applying it's outside of this or giving out that a game didn't get postponed when they were clear on the guidelines of how it would. Pitch availability, again, just gives you samples of what happens if it's not. So you can see there they can find an alternative pitch or will lose home advantage. So again, there's no arguments or moving them left, right and centre. This is exactly what happens. It's to try and make your job easier as a county executive. For the referees for appointments, so a section could be there about who appoints referees, about who contacts them, what's the behaviour, and then the referees' expenses. So it's very clear there even for referees, how much they're getting for various games and who pays them. Okay, so everything should be in, and this is all in one document that you can get approved and ratified at the start of the year in your county. For results, how are you going to get them sent back? All counties can have access to the games management system, and I cannot recommend it enough that you get all your fixtures up there in the games management system. If your county is not up there already, it will take a bit of time for the first year to upload them, but then in year 2, etc., you can duplicate them. But there's automatic text that will go to your referees, for example, if you're using the texting, they'll automatically text it back in. That if you're linked with a website, it'll automatically go on the website. So if you look at Our Ladies Gaelic website, the results are up there straight away as soon as a referee gets into the dressing room. They drop the text and it automatically populates the website. If anyone wants more information on that, just make contact with us and we'll get you linked up for training. If the referee's not appointed, how does it happen? Okay, so it just gives you all the things the scenarios in relation to it, and clubs are very clear then who's doing what. Decisions on placings, so as I said, instead of that row at the end of the year, how is it decided? It clearly states how it's decided, what's the guidelines in relation to decided. So they know before they kick a ball in a competition how a thing's going to be decided. There's loads of this, so I know I'm not giving you time to read them all because as I said, the full sample document is on the website. The timing and days of games. So if you have the times in, it makes it a lot easier then to work with other sports. So for instance, maybe it's under 10 go games, alternating weeks because the middle weeks are camogies weeks. Okay, so is there things you can work on with the different boards in relation to it? Under 14s, under 15s, and then from your other guidelines, as you see coming up where you want to change a game, it's changing within 5 days, for example, at least they know it's from this time. If the two clubs can't agree, it reverts back to the time that's on this competition guideline. So they're just samples as well, but it will help you see when and where everything should be penciled in. And mentors and players then will clearly know when their games are. For match day, knowing what the numbers are, okay, so as per official guide, but there may be numbers then you have for other competitions. The sideline, who's allowed on it. So again, clubs know you shouldn't have 20 mentors lined up along the sideline, how many is allowed on it, and then they get to county finals and wonder, why are we not allowed these amount of people? Because they shouldn't have had them in the first place. Okay, so keeping everything very clear. And then you might have different things for different competitions. So you might have playing rules. So maybe this is adult, for instance. What's the number of players that's allowed? You can see there what's the divisions, what's the competitions, what happens if there's a walkover. For the cup competition, then what happens? What's the rules? Because maybe that's the one without your county players. The championship rules, what are they in relation to it? The league rules. So for a mentor, even they have everything in the one space in relation to it. But there's none of this having to go back to a county board because we didn't realise it was going to be a draw of teams, or we didn't realise XYZ team weren't going to play. It's all very clear in it. It's all about getting your fixtures played as per schedule, and that spread that you'd hope to do and spent a lot of time planning at the start of the year. So planning in your county should ensure you have enough games being provided for all players at all grades, that there's not too much or too little time between fixtures. There's not too short of a time period for fixtures. So under 12 only been played in April, as we said, under 13 in June, no other fixtures for the year. But they're set in advance and plans forward with clubs at the start of the year. So to have all those dates at the start of the year, maybe the club do have something that they can then ask, listen, can I bring this forward 5 days or whatever's in your competition guidelines? They should take place on their scheduled date and competition rules in place to make sure this happens. So for example, the game set for the 11th of August at 2 p.m., unless agreed by both teams to play before that date, cannot be played after the date unless exceptional circumstances. So I know it can be so frustrating for some county executives and fixture committees where they spend so much time putting work into their planning and really good time. Cannot commend them enough. And all it takes is for one or two clubs to start playing up and cancelling the games and still wanting to play it at the end of the competition. So that holds the whole thing up for everybody else. So what you're trying to do is remember that just because it doesn't suit your club, you know how many clubs it's affecting. Okay, so how do we bring all this together? The results you should have from doing this is clear competition guidelines and fixture plan, the smooth running of fixtures as much as possible. Fixtures committee can fulfil their role because that's their guidance document. So the county board has agreed it, ratified it. Now they're there to roll it out. The county board meeting should be about county board items and not just fixtures. And most importantly, there should be more games played because they've been really planned from the start of the year and everyone knows where they fall into. Remember, and I suppose just wrapping up, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A or the chat. National provincial fixtures may be in the first part of the season, but it does not mean there's no club activity. It's just that the make sure you have a focus on the non-county players also. Plan in advance to increase access to pitches. So if we know our dates well in advance, it's a lot easier for your clubs then to say, listen, our under 14s are always going to be on a Monday night at this time. So to allow your clubs to actually get the pitches instead of we now have a game in 3 nights, we have to give up home advantage because we didn't know we were going to have it and there's another slot already in there. Look at the number of games you will have to assess requirement of referees. Do you have enough? So when you do out that plan, maybe you see there's really pinch point here. We're going to need more referees and they're all at that youth level. Can we work with the lead person of match officials in the development committee to train up more youth referees? Okay, so looking ahead, how do we get enough? And I think it is going to be the number one problem. Games can't go ahead without referees. So we need to support them, respect them and educate them, get more of them involved and bring them through the ranks. Have plan A and B dependent on when teams potentially exit the championship. So every county's plan A wants to be, we're in Croke Park for Ireland finals day. Okay, every county. And it would be wrong for any county not to have. So that's your plan A. Plan B is what happens if we get knocked out after the round stages, or we get knocked out after the quarterfinals. Is there a plan B that can then kick in to start maybe your championships a little bit earlier? So having your plan A and plan B and clearly communicate it to your clubs. And don't leave any age group until the end. It is my ultimate pet hate when I'm seeing, particularly, I don't know why it is with minors in a lot of places, and it's not just, it's boys as well, where it's left nearly till the end of the season. We'll pencil that in now. When they're the age group that we get most drop off, for girls who that's their only team, it could be their only games and in the coldest weather of the year. So how do we make sure they're getting games throughout the year? Said it could be a few festivals of football at 7-a-side, 9, doing something different, but keeping them involved is really, really important. So the take-home messages, all executives must be fully aware of the importance of reviewing all fixtures and reviewing them with your clubs to put a plan in place for the coming year. It can be good practice to have a reviewer, so somebody who's not on the fixtures committee, but literally is that person going, okay, here's all the fixtures. What date did they actually take place? Okay, maybe giving quarterly reports back to the fixtures committee going, listen, we're actually only at 50% of the scheduled games that has happened is there. So doing a little bit of a review, an independent person to be able to look in. Communication is key though to make that work. If the fixtures committee are reviewing the fixtures, it's important to have an open mind to change. So what sometimes can happen if you're the fixtures reviewer or fixtures committee looking at it, it's like, I know they said that's better, but no, we know that's it. Okay, that has worked, or this is why it hasn't. So having that open mind to change. The goal is to achieve the minimum standards in your county when you're establishing the fixtures plan. So those minimum standards are clearly published there as well. Essential to liaise with clubs as will encourage cooperation with all and decrease games getting cancelled. For any counties who fully adopted this, in year one, it was hard because clubs had been so used to getting away with maybe stuff in previous years. It's like, no, it was ratified. That's what it is. And then year two, they're not trying to cancel, not trying because they know what happened from year one. But the key message is value for money with the number of games. I hear a lot of people saying, oh, the cost it is to play the game. Number one, it's pittance compared to other activities that's out there. But if they have value for money, if you're paying X amount of membership and you know you're getting X amount of games, and on top of that, look at the amount of training sessions they're getting with the clubs and all the other activities, they just want to make sure they're getting value for money. So that player who's maybe only on a minor team and the county only runs a minor championship, no minor league, no minor best of the football, nothing, and maybe they get knocked out in game two. And what's worse is, what if they didn't even start on that minor team? Now, are they getting value for money? Okay, so what we need to make sure is we're getting the games out there for everyone, that everybody's getting value to be involved. So that's just a little short, I suppose, whistle stop tour, because the key thing after this session is that number one, you download those competition guidelines from the website, have a look at them. How can you tweak and change them to make sure you have really tight guidelines in your county? Have a look at your review from your county this year, starting on those steps that we said, step one, step two, how many dates you're going to need, prioritizing your competitions, where you're going to slot them in, and try and create your fixture plan for the year. Okay, there's always little tweaks and changes at some stage that may need to happen, but how you're going to, as much as possible, have your fixture plan ready for the year. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A, and I will get back to you, no problem at all.